Okay, so this is section 2.3, part 1. We're going to be talking about product rule and quotient rule. And what we're doing here is we're getting into slightly more complicated functions. If I give you f of x equals 3x squared plus 5x, you can do this with power rule. It'd be 6x plus 5 for your derivative. Okay, so that one's not a big deal. What we want to do is try to go to slightly more complicated ones. And what we're going to do here, we'll start off with product rule. It's used when multiplying two functions. A lot of people mess up on this by trying to use it when you're adding, subtracting functions. You do not, okay? That was a previous one we talked about here. This is not an application for product rule because you're adding. Product rule you just use for subtracting or for multiplying. And in general, what product rule looks like is if we're trying to take the derivative of a product of two functions, let's call them f of x and g of x, then it's going to be f prime, the derivative of f, times the original function g, plus the derivative of g times the original function f. And let's look at some examples. So for instance, let's say we have a function which is x cubed cosine of x. Big thing here is to figure out what two functions we have. On this one, it's not all that hard. This would be f, and this would be g. I got two functions of x. So what I do then is I will come back in on these, and I make up sort of a pseudo table. You don't have to do this, but this helps me keep things straight. So I come up with, and I've got f equals x cubed, and g equals cosine of x. Now I know I need the derivative, so I'm going to go ahead and get the derivative of these pieces. This is power rule. And g prime is going to be negative sine of x. All right, now what I know is, for my power rule, I've got f prime times g. So that is this cross product right here. So I write that down. I'm going to have 3x squared times cosine of x plus, and this will be, write this down, that's my f prime here, and this is g. Then plus, now I know I have to do g prime, which is right here, times f. So I've got a minus, which means that the plus is going to go away, and it will become a minus. And I'm going to put my f first. So it will be x cubed sine of x, which is the cross product between these two terms right here. Okay, so there's my derivative. Now I go in and see if there's something I can factor out. Before I do that, so let's come back in. There's my x cubed, that is f, and that is g prime. So there's my product rule, f prime g plus g prime f. Remember, it doesn't matter what order you multiply these in. All right, well, notice I can factor out an x, so I'm going to do that. I have x times 3x cosine of x minus sine of x. And that will be the final answer right here. All right, let's take a look at one which is slightly more complicated. It looks really nasty, and I'm going to work this one two different ways. So my function, let's call it j of x, is going to equal to sine of x over x squared. All right. So to use product rule on this, I actually have to come up with a product that's easy enough to do by rationalizing this guy right here. So that's going to give me sine of x times x to the negative 2. Okay. So there's f and there's g. So f is sine of x. G is x to the negative 2. Now I need to find the derivatives. So f prime is cosine of x. G prime is negative 2x to the negative 3. Subtracting 1 from there. Okay, so now we're ready to put these together. And you remember we've got f prime times g. And I tend to like to put my x's here out in front of the trig function. The reason is because I don't want all of this messed up with the inside of what's in all of here, because it's a cosine of x times this one. So let's do f prime g. So I will have x to the negative 2 times cosine of x plus, and then I will have g prime f. And again, I've got a negative. That will be minus 2x sine of x to the negative 3. Whoop, wrong one. To the negative 3 up here. Okay. So now let's go back in and rewrite this thing, now that we've got this. As you can see, this can start to get a little bit messy, and the next trick I'm going to show you is a way out of this. So now I'm going to have cosine of x over x squared minus 2 sine of x over x cubed. Need a common denominator, which in this case will be x cubed. So I have to multiply this one by x. And you can sort of see what's going to happen here. X times x squared gives me x cubed. So I've got x cosine of x minus 2 sine of x. And that is the derivative of my function. Okay, so let's go back in then and take a look at another rule called quotient rule. Since we dealt with product rule, quotient rule is going to deal with things where you're dividing. And let's deal with the same function. Oh, well, before I do that, let me give you the rule. So the quotient rule. So if I have a function which is a quotient of two functions, in other words, this will be possibly a rational one. What if? Let's call it h. Then h prime of x, the first derivative, is going to be, and the top part of this is going to look kind of like product rule, f prime g minus, because I've got quotient, g prime f over g squared. Okay? So now that we've got that, let's come back in and revisit j of x, which was sine of x over x squared. Now you'll recall I did this using product rule by making this a negative quotient. Remember, you don't have to. You can use quotient rule on this, where your numerator will be f, your denominator will be g. So I've got f, then is sine of x, g is x squared. Okay, now I take the derivatives, because again I need the derivatives of both of these things. So f prime, the derivative is cosine of x. Derivative of g is, well, two x. All right, so now I come back in, I plug in up here. I'm going to have f prime times g. So that will give me x squared cosine of x minus g prime f 2x sine of x. And if you're smart, you'll be looking across over here and seeing where, gee, this looks a whole lot like this. However, we're divided by x squared squared. All right, so let's simplify this again. I'm going to take an x out, so I'm going to have an x times x cosine of x minus 2 sine of x divided by x squared squared is x to the fourth. And x over x to the fourth will give me x cosine of x minus 2 sine of x over x to the third. And this is a good thing, because if you take a look, this one looks just like this one. And they should. So which one should you use? Some people feel very strongly that quotient rule ought to go away, that you can do everything with product rule. Personally, I've found that sometimes quotient rule is much easier to use, and sometimes it's not. So the question is, this becomes a matter of experience with you, which one you want to deal with and which one you feel most comfortable with. But there will be times when quotient rule really will be a lot easier for you to use. Okay, so now that we've done this, let's really deal with a nasty little function. All right, now when you take a look at this, first thing is, oh, it's a quotient. No, you don't have an x down here. What I suggest you do is what you have been doing, which is rewrite this thing. That will be 1/3 times x squared plus 2x. All right, and now we could go in and we want to find the derivative. So y prime And remember, since you're multiplying by a constant, you can pull this out of your calculus. So it's 1/3 d dx. Now, just because you pulled it out of your calculus doesn't mean it goes away. It's still out there. We're just not going to deal with it. And if you take a look at this, you'll say, wait, that's not quotient rule. That's power rule. And you're right, it is. Take the derivative of this. So it's 2x plus 2 over 3. And that's the first derivative. All right? So be careful. Or if you want to, you could rewrite this as, if we factor the 2 out, as 2/3 x plus 1. Either one of these would be acceptable. Okay. I want to do one more. F of x equals 3 minus 2x minus x squared over x squared minus 1. All right, this one really is quotient rule. And this is one where right now we haven't shown you how to do this yet. So let's deal with this as quotient rule, where this will be f, and this over here will be g. So I write it down. F is 3 minus 2x minus x squared. G is x squared minus 1. F prime equals, well, gee, this looks like power rule. That's 0 minus 2 minus 2x. G prime equals 2x. Okay, so now we're done with our calculus. We've got to put all of this back together. So I'm going to have f prime times g. And it's important in quotient rule that you do f prime times g first because you're subtracting. So let's do that. I'm going to have f prime, which will be 2 minus 2x times x squared minus 1 minus, and then I will have g prime f 2x times 3 minus 2x minus x squared and that will all be over x squared minus 1 squared. Okay, so if I was to simplify this, and I don't know that we can, I would look to see if I can factor something out of there. So if I do that, I'm going to have an x and a negative x. Give me the negative x squared. So factors of plus 3, that will add up to a negative 2. Then we're going to be, and looky here, we can't. Give me 3 and 1. All right, I've got a negative here, and I want that negative, so I'm going to put a plus 3, 3x, and a plus 2. I think this will rise. No, plus 1. So I have a negative x plus 1. If I check that, that will give me negative 3x plus x, which gives me negative 2x. And 3 times 1 gives me a 3. So I've got it. All right, so now I'm going to go back in and write out my factored form and see if this has helped me at all. The other thing I'm going to do is factor this guy. So now I've got 2 minus 2x. Sometimes you do all of this and you don't get anything. x plus 1, x minus 1, minus 2x times x plus 3, negative x plus 1. All of this is going to be over x squared minus 1 squared. So my first instinct is to say, oh look, I've got squared here and squared here. It would work, except when we look over here, we notice we don't have the same term. So all that factoring is basically for naught. And when we come back up, this is basically our simple term, or if you left it like this, that would be all right also. But you need to be sure and at least explore the possibility of factoring and canceling some stuff out.